The first step of this project is to go ahead and draw or sketch out your picture. You want to capture most of the details, but you're not going to get every single detail. We are using a grid for this project just to ensure that the proportions are correct and that we are filling up our entire paper. When you begin to draw, you want to start with the basic outline before you move into any details. It's going to help you see the image overall first, and then we can fix details later. Remember that when we learned how to draw a grid, we go one box at a time. You're paying attention to how big that line is in that box, whether it's taking up half of it or it's only taking up a quarter of it. It all matters in making your proportions correct. So make sure you look at one box at a time and make sure that you're drawing it in the right area as well. Remember, you can label your reference photo and you can label your paper, letters across the top and numbers down the side to help you identify the correct box when drawing. As you're drawing, you are also looking for the shapes that are made by the highlights and the shadows. You're not just looking at the outside contour of the animals. Start blocking in the shapes and shadows so it will be easier once you begin shading. Don't forget that if your image also has a background in it, you can go ahead and sketch that as well. You're going to have less details in the background than you do in the foreground or midground. If you also want to use a separate picture to change your background, you may as well. Just make sure you have that reference photo in front of you to look at and make sure you're getting the proportions correct to match your original drawing. Whenever you have finished drawing your image, go back and carefully erase all of your grid lines. If you accidentally erase part of your picture, not a problem, just go back in and draw it again. But you want to make sure the entire grid is gone from both the animal as well as the background. The entire grid is gone now. Now that your contour outline is completely done of your animal or objects in your picture, it is time to start marking in all of the cast shadows and highlights that we see in our reference photo. It's important to look at your reference photo because these shadows and highlights make shapes. You don't want to just say, oh, here in this area it's darker, Look at the shape that that shadow is making so that way it turns out like your photo in the end. I recommend you start with the darkest areas first and slowly work your way to the tonal areas. You don't want to go anywhere close to the lighter end of your value scale. We are strictly staying with the darkest values. We want to slowly sneak up on the other values, the lighter ones, and we will wait to officially mark in those lighter ones until we get to the coffee painting next. We are going to be doing this project in layers. So we are going to start with our layer of our ebony pencil, and then we will go through and we will do our layer of coffee afterwards. The layers are going to make it a lot richer, add more contrast, and to make it very dramatic. In this step, we have to start with our graphite or ebony pencil. We are still trying to get a lot of texture even in this stage. So make sure you're paying attention to your reference photo. Which direction is the fur going? It doesn't all go the same direction every time. Every area of your animal can be different. For instance, the forehead, it goes up and over, but down towards the side of the face, it starts on the side and goes down. Same thing in the background with your grass. The grass can go all different directions, the hay, the trees, whatever it is you have in your background. Make sure you pay close attention to capture all the details in your photograph. As you are working, you should have your value scale right next to you. You need to make sure that your value scale um, is there so that way you can use it to match up your value you're using to your reference photo. So that way you get in all of your values right away and it makes the coffee painting later a little bit easier. One last reminder that all shadows make shapes, just like objects. Make sure you are paying attention to the shape of your shadows in your reference photo. When you are trying to make your different values of coffee paint in your paint palette, you need to be very careful. It can be very deceiving as you are trying to water down from your thick paste. It can look not dark enough on your palette. However, as soon as you put it onto your paper, it can get way too dark. Make sure that you are very careful when mixing your coffee. You want to always swatch your mixture before using it on your painting. You can see here I have that paint swatch paper. It's just a scrap piece of paper to test it out before using it. Once your values are resolved with your ebony pencil, it is time to paint washes of coffee over your drawing. I am starting with the thin wash in our darkest areas first, and then I will slowly blend that into our tonal areas. Continue to paint your darker values with your light washes. You can slowly begin to build up darker values by going over your ebony pencil that was already on your paper. Remember that your reference photo should be directly in front of you the entire time you are painting. You can begin to make darker values in your palette, switch to smaller brushes to paint smaller details that are also in that dark value range. You want to gradually build up your coffee layers, layer after layer, until you achieve a deep, rich depth of value. Not only should you have your reference photo there in front of you, but you also should have your value scale. We need to see every single value on your value scale in your picture. To do this, you're going to build up layers. So we started with a light wash, and now we're going back and we're starting to build up more layers with those lighter tones to build deeper, darker areas that we see in our picture and from our value scale that match the picture with the value scale. As we continue to move on to more and more layers, we're going to start adding in the texture. We're going to start by talking about the fur texture on animals. You need to make sure that you have your reference photo right next to you because you should be looking at that most of the time to see the direction that the fur should be going in. As you can see on the top of the head of this goat, the fur is going from the center forehead up, but then as you move to the side of the face, it starts going down. So every little area is going to require your careful attention to that detail to make sure it's going to be correct, so you don't ruin that illusion. To paint with fur, you're going to, usually it's darker towards the base of the fur strand and lighter at the top. To do this, load your brush with your paint, or in this case, coffee. You're going to start it at the base of the strand and then flick your brush up into the correct direction, allowing the paint to get lighter as you do so. When it comes to the texture of hay or grass, you are also going to want to pay attention to your reference photo. It's a lot of a dry brush technique, just like with watercolor. The paper is dry and it's very little actual paint on your brush, so that way you can control it better. Use cross-hatching techniques, whatever is going to fit your texture better. Scumbling is also one that can be used. Remember, that's usually more of a fluffier type of texture, depending on where you're putting it at. Pay attention to your reference photo. The biggest issue most people have when it comes to doing their art and making it look realistic is not looking at your reference photo enough. You should be looking at your reference photo more than you're looking at your actual artwork. Remember, it's all about creating an illusion in an artwork. You are the magician, tricking people into seeing things the way you want them to see it. And the only way we get it real is by paying attention to every single detail. When it comes to other objects in your photos, things in the background or the horns on this goat, you're still going to have some texture. So consider things like stippling that can add more of a rougher look to it when you're painting. But treat your other objects just like you do 3D objects when it comes to shading with any other media. One last very important tip. This is just like working with watercolor. Watercolor takes patience. You have to make sure you let your layers dry in between. Otherwise, it will kind of all bleed together and make a giant mess on your paper. So let things dry between your layers.